Welcome to this video, Steelers, in which I'm going to show you how I painted and made these Plastic Soldier Company SDKFZ251s. There's various variants in here. The footage that I use in this video was taken from various live streams that I did while I was putting these together, so I do apologise if the images are not so great. But let's dive in and I shall show you the steps that I took to get to this point. The first stage, as always, is basically removing all the parts from the sprues. I mean, what I normally do is I would prime these before I've taken anything off of the sprues themselves. So they're already painted. They've already got that grey colour on them. I'll just take them off, nip them off with some little snippers, and then just clean off with a knife, as you can see, as I'm doing here. Very simple process. I generally do all the bits for each of the individual vehicles, so I know exactly what I've got and what I'm dealing with before I move on to the next section. And that next section is quite obviously putting the things together. I use liquid cement on these because the plastic is a nice styrene plastic, so it melts with the liquid cement and creates that really firm bond. You could use super glue if you wanted to, but I find super glue is far too brittle for plastic. You're better off just getting some of this liquid stuff. It's easy to apply. You could use a smaller brush if you really wanted to than the one that they provide. But very simply, putting these together, it's a pretty simple process. They all go together quite simply and quite easily. And the Plastic Soldier Company stuff is really well detailed and has very sharp joins as model kits themselves, so that's always something that's worthwhile praising. I also added some stowage at this point as well, and I'd pretty much finished them off by that point. I added some conversion bits just to make these a little bit more interesting than normal troop carriers, but that was it. They were finished and they were ready for painting. I was keen to try out my airbrush on these. I wanted to do the three-tone German camo scheme using that airbrush as well, just to try to give myself a few lessons on how to use it. So basically I just gave them an undercoat. What I normally do is I will super glue them to the old paint bottles, as you can see here, so I can actually hold them and get around all the nooks and crannies. As I mentioned before, the super glue is quite brittle, so when it comes to removing them from those bottles, you can quite easily just snap them off almost at the end of it, and it leaves a little lump at the bottom of the vehicle, but you're not going to see that anyway because I do base them, so it doesn't bother me that much. You could probably file it away or cut it away quite easily anyway. But yeah, I just used Vallejo's Middle Stone. This was their actual hobby colour, but I just thinned it down with the airbrush thinner itself, just so it sprayed on quite easily, and just worked my way all the way around the vehicles until they were covered. As I said, I was using the airbrush to try out the three-tone camo spray version, so it looks as though it's been sprayed on in the field. This is the red-brown, so this is going over the top of the middle stone. In the past I've used putty to seal off areas, but I wanted to do this by hand to look like the crew had applied it themselves. So dropping the pressure on the airbrush, I was able to get quite a small thin line of brown paint on these. I will then go ahead and paint green over the top of them, but this is just the first part of that three-tone camo colour, which is very typical of the German army after 1943 until 1945. And over the top of that brown I then applied green. This is reflective green, again thinned down. You can actually see I've gone a little bit too thick on these ones, and I wasn't particularly pleased with the initial spraying that I'd done. This was during, like I said, the live session. So I actually went back the next day and I resprayed them completely. The good thing about the spray gun is that it creates quite a thin layer of paint, so you're not obliterating a lot of details, and I was just able to go back. These really were just experiments, and I was just trying them out, and I was trying out what I could do with the airbrush. So I did have to go back and retry them. I mean, you know, make mistakes, that's the thing, isn't it? You're learning how to use a new tool. I've not used an airbrush before, so I needed to know how it works, basically, and this is exactly what I was doing with these vehicles. And one of the good things I've seen about the airbrush is that it is actually pretty quick drying. So I was able to go in almost immediately afterwards and start to paint up some of this stowage. So I was just painting the blankets and greatcoats and things that are stuck on the sides of these. And I just worked my way through all the different bits and pieces. This is just to add a little bit of colour and shape to the vehicles as much as anything else. Then I started painting the tracks and the wheels in black. I do the tracks, I paint them in black basically, and then we'll wash them with a rust colour, but also with metal as well, just kind of slightly dry brushed over the top just to give them a bit of a rusty metally colour. This is quite a boring part of the job actually, but it's worthwhile doing, and it's worthwhile persevering and getting through. And I really don't like painting wheels on vehicles because I'm just not very neat. But one good thing is you can always cover up any mistakes that you make with all the weathering later on in the process. I've skipped forward a little bit here. I'm afraid I didn't actually film myself weathering or doing the basic weathering on these vehicles. What I had done is I'd basically give them a wash. Once I'd painted everything, I'd given them a wash in Agrax Earthshade, a thinned down version of it, and I was quite happy with how that looked. But then I moved on to using weathering powders just to bring out some of the small details here and there. You can also see the rust wash that I've used on the tracks on the front of this particular vehicle. This is the Flurry wash. Now I was using the Revel pigments that I've got, weathering pigments. This one in particular was rust. Just dabbing it on some of the areas where the metal joins are, so like the hinges and things on the engine cover and that kind of thing, and just in some of the folds and the creases of the various bits of metal where bits would chip off and you would start to get rust coming through as well. This is a very nice weathering powder, and I would really recommend getting any kind of weathering powder you can, because it certainly adds a lot of detail to these kind of vehicles. And the next stage with weathering powders was to use mud coloured, and I was just basically liberally applying this to the wheels and to the tracks as well, just to give them a bit of a granular look when it comes to weathering. So this is just bits and pieces that are stuck on. Really, I should have used a fixer here. I didn't in the first instance. It's basically a pigment fixer which just will hold it in place, because otherwise once you come to varnish it, as I did later on, it will blow all the pigments off. So what I did, I went back, added some pigment fixer, and then just went round it again with the weathering powders as I'd used previously. But it's a very simple job. Just use a dry brush and dip it into the powder. Don't forget to put down a piece of toweling as well underneath, so you can either collect all the powders up later on that you drop, or stop them getting all over your work surface, because they do stain everything, and I'm speaking from experience when I say this. And that was them pretty much complete. All I needed to do was to add them onto some bases, add the crew, which I'd painted on the sprues and then just glued in once I'd varnished everything, and just added one or two small details here and there, like the MG34s on the front of them. So as I say, I wanted to make these into something slightly different than the normal troop carriers. One of them is a normal troop carrier, but I just put a load of stowage on it, and the other ones various versions. So I've got an 81mm mortar, you can see coming up there on the right hand side. On the left hand side you've got the Pack 37 command version, and also at the back is the flamethrower version with two large flamethrower protrusions on them there. So that's going to be quite devastating in a game. These will probably be used in either Chain of Command, I Ain't Been Shot Mum, or more latterly O Group. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I say, I probably could have gone into a lot more detail about the making of these, but I just wanted to show you some of the basic stages and how they turned out. I was quite pleased with how the airbrushing went, and I'm quite happy with these. They'll take pride of place on my table at some point in the future. If you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, give me a like and give me a comment, and thanks for watching.